Hi, this is Charles C. McGowan with the SOLREI Company. This is Elegant Reasonism in Unification's Wake, Part 5, and it is a discussion about the impact and influences that Elegant Reasonism has on business. Our standard notice is that this presentation and all of the other ones are in the user library of solrei.co, SOLREI.co. The best way to see these or experience these presentations is to log on to the website, and then all the blue hyperlinks and all the hyperlinks that are in the presentations will resolve to their respective detail pages back into the website. And in that way, if there's any questions as you're going through them, then you can get that detail as required. The larger abstract for the presentation is that there are three takeaways from all of this relative to business, and they center up on the concept of abstractions in general, and then the other area is Langer epistemology errors, and then systems engineering is kind of how you unravel all of that and put it into position and gather requirements from that. Abstractions in general always have a tendency to insulate and isolate higher ordered ideas from lower ordered detail. And when we mistake an abstraction for actual reality, that's when we commit a Langer epistemology error. And systems engineering skills reflect the fact that that every system will have two views, a logical view and a physical view. And because of Langer epistemology errors, we get tricked, as humans we get tricked into believing that we're dealing with actual reality rather than abstractions of it. And in a nutshell, that's the trap. And so the Elegant Reasonism framework helps you sort that out. And as you see, we have a decision checkpoint flowchart that we'll show you in a minute, and we'll gate that as a threshold in terms of going forward. Executive management will also appreciate the fact that this very directly impacts value derivation and how we go about delivering value to our customers going forward. It's going to change the dynamics of competition and quality metrics and a whole bunch of other things too, but we'll get into those in a few minutes. The immediate business impact is that the core message of this chart to leaders within any business is that the mode of thinking which cannot accomplish unification is not presenting all of the facts to management nor to shareholders and stakeholders. It's just that simple. And it's that hard, cold fact which holds implications for volatility, competition, value chains, and consumers worldwide. Where your niche exists within the global economy will likely dictate how you approach Elegant Reasonism. Your niche will shape your opportunity and competitive threat relative to your strategic brand intent and the value statements you strive for within your customer base. The better you are able to wield Elegant Reasonism, the better you'll be able to accomplish your goals and objectives, especially in the world going forward. Immediate implications will manifest not just from your organization, but the holistic environment that you operate. The extended value chain or chains in which your organization participates may hold differing implications, but do not make the mistake of believing that you're immune from associated volatility or competitive dynamics. That might flow back to you from your value chains when you least expect it. So you have to think about this systemically. holistically, and you need to maintain critical situation awareness thinking. Discerning unification, we typically use this framework when we're working through issues. It's problems, challenges, alternatives, your choice, and then the rationale, and then what your next steps are, and then who owns those things. Image here we thought represented the historical attempt to discern unification and humans' feeble attempts to get there prior to all of this. Elegant Reasonism is a net new epistemology which demands truth as a function of the unified universe. And it does that as a philosophical predicate priority consideration. And that's really what allows us to get beyond the limitations imposed by human physiology. Elegant Reasonism employs empiricism as a subset epistemology. Bayesian analytics and more are employed to discern distinctions where and statistical weighting where precise discrimination is required. And as you see, we have industry standard approaches to quality and quality metrics that we employ so that you can articulate the results of any given investigation that you conduct to other communities. People that are in business and familiar with business planning processes will be familiar with the set of C's that they use to measure business plans. And there are words like cogent and coherent and cohesive, and we're adding closure. But we typically refer to all of those things as the realm of C's. And there's a bunch of them, and they're on the website, and you can link them from this presentation. But commission of Langer epistemology errors ensnares your mind inside logic traps that can be insidiously subtle. And for this reason, the concept of unification must be a philosophical predicate priority consideration, entering science. Science must once again recognize that the philosophy of nature, but now with special requirements of equipment, methods, and processes. Modern practitioners often believe that science is distinct from philosophy rather than embracing its traditional or historic roots. And we encourage people to explore these issues as they come to grips with the implications of unification. So this is our framework that is the approach to business impact. It's the problem, the challenge statement, the different alternatives, the choice that you make, the rationale for that choice, and then next steps, and then whoever the owners are. The way we typically do this is that we allow a single sentence to be used that states what the problem is, and then 2 sentences for the challenges associated with that problem. And then we always try and use three and no more than 3 and no less than 3 alternatives, and that forces us to sort of think outside the box maybe sometimes. And then we have a choice, and then 3 or 4 bullets or 5 bullets at the most for the rationale for that choice, and the rationale should include both pros and cons. And then we have a set of next steps to beyond the rationale, and then who the owners are for getting everything done. So in this case, the takeaway from our essentially 2 decades long systems review is that status quo thinking, it's not that it does not unify physics, and it doesn't, but it's that it cannot unify physics. It will never do it because the core constructs of that model don't allow it. They preclude unification. And it is the Langer epistemology errors, the abstractions, and logical views of physical systems and those kinds of things that come from systems engineering and requirements gathering that bring all of those insights into clear illumination and illustrate for us the path forward. So let's talk about the general process flow of Elegant Reasonism. We cover this in other presentations online. You can see that on SOLREI Studios on YouTube. But it's basically three areas. You have to recognize what the problem is. You have to know that you're committing Langer epistemology errors. You have to inventory your abstractions, and then you have to juxtapose those in order to illuminate them in a framework. And for that, we use constructs we call translation matrices. And then you have to understand encapsulation of those models and those concepts, layer down, and then you conduct your systems review and you go through those things. I'm not going to read the chart to you, but you can. And then we can start the analysis piece of this and come into alignment with the unified universe. As you go through this, the relationship between the tools is, so the ISO 9001 unification tool is where the abstraction inventory resides. You list them there, you define them, you establish the relationship patterns there, and then that content flows into the translation matrices, into the various models, M1 through M7, whichever ones you want to pick. And here those models are. They are all linked. They're each individually linked back to a little bit of a description back in the website. And then you can go through this analytics stack to really understand the analytical relationships between any given paradigm and the specific encapsulated interpretive model that reflects that relative to the actual reality, which we always hold distinct, unique, and litmus. This is the process decision checkpoint flowchart. You enter it in the upper left and you strive to get to the lower right. The loop that we've been hung in for essentially the last several thousand years is on the left hand side of this as we come down from unified thinking. Or you can change that question so that make it a simple statement. Can you unify physics? Can you unify your thinking? Most people today will say no. That means you have to go into an abstraction inventory, which is where that tool comes in. You don't have to use our tool. You can use any tool as long as it accomplishes the same capability. Anyway, then the team as a whole, every individual on the team has to understand, are they working with abstractions or are they working with reality? If they think they're working with reality, then they are very likely committing Langer epistemology errors. And then you go back up and you go in that loop until everybody understands what constitutes a Langer epistemology error and everything behind that. There's just as an aside, all of these boxes on the PDF file, on the PDF chart here, are linked back into the website, so you can click Langer epistemology errors, or you can click abstraction inventory, etc., and get that back in detail. If there's any element here that you do not understand, then click that link, read that material, and study it until you understand what the intent of it was. Anyway, once you understand that what a Langer epistemology error is, and that you're not committing them, which is a big deal all by itself, then that's the gate. So then you can go forward into the illumination phase and ask yourself if you're mode shifting effectively. Well, when you first start your investigation, the answer to that's going to be no. And then you go down and you complete your translation matrices. And that does not have to be a mathematical, the stereotypical way we think of matrix. You go to a chart, or a blackboard or chalkboard or whiteboard, and write, draw your columns and rows and maybe layers. You can write that out in a manuscript and effectively represent the three-dimensional matrices in manuscript form. So there's a lot of different ways to think about that as you go forward. But anyway, are you effective with that? Well, in the beginning, you're going to say no, and then you go back over here and you start through that Langer epistemology error loop again, and you keep doing that, and then you go through here and you just stay in this loop until you get that reconciled, and that you can mode shift model to model to reflect the any given paradigm that you're investigating, and then once you can do that and go across the different models and see all the different relationship pattern changes model to model, then you can start your analysis on that and go down through that analytic stack. You want to make sure that are you compliant with the full range of realms of C's, one of which is closure. If you can't close to unification, then you go back through the loop again. Once you can close to unification, then you can start developing your holistic insights. And then, you go back and say, okay, well, what was my original investigation? And was that effective? Did it meet our company's goals and objectives? Is it consistent with all of the quality metrics, whether it's Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award kinds of constructs, or whether it's ISO 9001, QMS standards, etc., Six Sigma, all of that. Then you can start working on your unified treatise. Managers need to recognize that status quo thinkers will likely get hung up on the left-hand side of this chart. It's important for everybody to comprehend that the implications of mistaking abstractions for reality holds for the business. Business planners and others will likely be familiar with the C's of the business plans, as we said, but we need to get to a perspective where our thinking and our behavior reflects the unified universe. When we look at the tools and the business purpose, business leadership should not get hung up on terms like matrices or, concrete thinkers will want to use such terms to exclusion, and that would likely be result in mistakes. The company SOLREI encourages a holistic approach to use these tools. The first systems review that we did produced an 828-page manuscript, which is now obsolete. It is still on, the outline for it is on Amazon, but it's no longer available. So you can go there and look at that outline. And that's the point that I was making earlier, is that while that manuscript is linear, because it was turned into a book, it was handled as if it were a three-dimensional matrix. And that's, how we began to start trying to document the implications. And part of the reason it's obsolete now is that unification has a great deal more requirements than were originally considered when we began pulling all of that together. And so that manuscript is obsolete. It's been removed from the marketplace. If anybody has one in the marketplace, it's obsolete and it will lead you astray. And we strongly encourage that you destroy it, because it's gonna pull you into a rabbit hole that you don't really want to go in. One of the other points that we wanted to make was that we wanted to make sure that business people understood, because everybody uses word processors to do their business planning. And as you start trying to articulate these translation matrices in manuscript form, you're going to really get into really employing all of the features and functions of the software in order to reflect that detail in your document. And if your team needs to be on the same piece of software, don't get into this thinking that, oh, well, this person's on software application A and this other set's on application B, and there may be C or D or E or F. But the point is that each one of those applications implements those features with different control codes, and then you will wind up with software application files that are not compatible application to application to application. So make sure that you just pick one and use it for the entire team. Critical situationally aware thinking. Critical thinking is a term that's been around for a long time, but it must now be situationally aware. And when we mean situationally aware, we mean the patterns that are made manifest by each one of the encapsulated interpretive models. As you go model to model, how a given paradigm is made manifest is different. What happens may not change, but why it's true does. We can give lots of examples for this. Newton's laws are one, and it's a long list of examples. But the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns can change model to model, and so it's very, very important that you use critical thinking and make sure that that critical thinking is situationally aware, given that decision checkpoint flowchart and the generalized flow as you work towards treatise and come to understand the insights that are relevant for your niche and for your particular business in the global economy. Evidence chains are three-dimensional in nature. They weave a tapestry that illustrates your insights. They are developed down through the analytic stack and not just within any given encapsulated interpretive model. Although they are there as well, but they line up and illustrate and illuminate the insights for your particular investigation in the context of the unified universe. And so these are themes of discussion that you might think about that will wind up inside your treatise. Businesses, leaders and executives, managers and administrators in every aspect of business worldwide are invited to inspect Elegant Reasonism with their own independent, critically, situationally aware thinking and discern it for themselves what it is, how it works, and how the results that it's obtained to date. Companies, all enterprise management executives are charged by their owners, shareholders, in maximizing the return on the investment. They want the most profit from the least expense. Hence, that's why we have PE ratios. The better those numbers are, the more investing consumers are happy. And it doesn't matter whether those investors are individuals or institutional in nature. They essentially desire the same result for the same reasons. The point here is that the fundamental issue at the base of all of this is the philosophy of value derivation. That's an area in philosophy that's called axiology, but nobody ever hardly uses that word. But it is the philosophy of value. It's how you develop and discern value. And Elegant Reasonism develops axiology as a function of the unified universe. And so the more in line with that you are, the more cogent your evidence is, the clearer your processes are, and your processes are linked back into nature and into the unified universe. An example for economic linkage is the book Human Action by Ludwig von Mises. That's one area where we can show you an example of action and how it relates back to Elegant Reasonism. Professional organizations support communities of people that are focused in a given niche in the global economy. Many of them have structured approaches. They use the scientific method, and they more than likely are employing the empiricism form of epistemology. And there's the caveat there is that empiricism is intrinsically inherent to human physiology, and that is also its strategic Achilles heel. You need to be able to get past those limitations in order to get through the gate that's on that checkpoint flowchart. This affects how we do peer reviews. It affects editing criteria for, journals that scientists and engineers would review, and medical professionals. There's a whole bunch of different areas where this matters. And those same points are very, very applicable to publishers, especially if you're publishing for one of these professional communities. You can go through these points as well, and they are linked back into the various areas on the website for that greater detail. But essentially, effective November 26, 2020, when the USPTO published Elegant Reasonism, the world is beginning to change as people become situationally aware, not just of Elegant Reasonism, but the implications of unification and what that means to what it is they do and what it is we all think we know. Then all of that is going to be articulated back through materials brought to the global economy by publishers. And so it's incumbent on the editing boards of these publishing houses to embrace Elegant Reasonism as they start vetting articles and discussing volatility and competitive threat and etc. as it relates to some aspect of the marketplace. There's essentially three different kinds of, or three areas where education is conducted. Academic institutions they can be cost centers, they can be not-for-profit organizations, or they can be profit-centric in order to, they're self-sustaining, in other words. And those latter types of institutions are essentially businesses, but they're in the business of teaching other people, academic. And universities will probably, for the most part, fall in that latter category. I guess the point here is that once we get to a point where we can describe the universe, but reflect the universe bang to bang, and we did do that, you're then required to connect in every other school of thought and relate it back to the universe as a whole, a holistic whole. And Suzanne Candy Langer's body of work really couples art and art appreciation. Ludwig von Mises' body of work and his specific treatise called Human Action links economics. And we can keep going down that list. So it's not just theoretical astrophysics that are involved here, it's everything. And as we'll see in just a minute, that there's a framework and a way to shift the reference frame so that everything else will fall into line with that as well. The point here to the business of education is that Elegant Reasonism affects every part of everything that these kinds of organizations do. And it is something that's going to need to be considered by the Board of Trustees, the staff, the people who are actually teaching, the professors and whatnot that are teaching these different subjects, and it needs to be intrinsic to what it is that they do. Different industries will mode shift the axiology, the philosophy of value derivation, in different ways, and there's going to be volatility associated with that. There's a couple of different examples in these bullets from different industries, and each industry is going to have to go through and do a systems review of their normal processes and value chains to really start understanding and articulating how Elegant Reasonism will affect that industry. And these are some bullet points that to get people started to thinking along those lines. The long-term implications is that critical situational awareness thinking in context of Elegant Reasonism suggests an increased importance and value to the Earth and the biosphere. There's a lot of reasons for that I'm not going to get into in this presentation, but for a lot of reasons people think that the Earth is too big or whatever. It's the point that our takeaway insight from what it is we did is that the earth is precious, and we need to treat it as such. And we may be here for a very long time. The people that were expecting us to do interstellar travel and move out into the solar, we might be able to move out into the solar system, but I don't know that we're going to get too much further than that. It may be that we can do that later on, but that's very much further out into the future than we had previously anticipated. So that insight then makes where we are incredibly important. And strategic sustainability takes on both deeper and broader consequences in context. And business enterprise axiology, therefore, must reflect strategic sustainability priorities in support of competitive endurance. And short-sightedness would otherwise doom civilization ensnared in wishful thinking that will never come manifest, potentially never come manifest. We have to have a realistic view of what it is we can do and accomplish and why that's the case. Volatility, market volatility, is going to likely rise in the short term as individual businesses and international businesses reassess their relative and respective value chains in context of competitive dynamic. In the long term, beyond the next coming decade, these factors should begin to dissipate as companies embrace elegant reasonism worldwide and it becomes the operational norm. But we're a long way away from that now. Hopefully, we certainly look forward to a time when all of that dust settles and these issues become normalized through free market practices. But as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle says, the game is afoot. So what is SOLREI doing? We're working on certification programs. We're working on the ability to conduct direct consulting engagements to help people understand business process reengineering efforts that would integrate elegant reasonisms into their organizations. And we're focusing on people who enable those and empower others. So if we can train the trainers, then that's where we're going to get the most traction. And so that's our objective and focus. And so as a result of that, we're looking for business personnel, consulting practitioners, educators, R&D scientists and engineers, and systems engineering professionals worldwide. And I would encourage you to engage the incosi.org. That's INCOSE.org for access to systems engineering and skilled people in around the world. The enterprise skills that are needed, wielding elegant reasonism effectively requires a multidisciplinary skill set. So that means you're going to need a lot of different people, a lot of different kinds of people probably. But they all need to understand the process, the general process, and that decision checkpoint flowchart and how to wield and use the tools. They're going to need to be able to come together as a team. And the takeaway that we have is that there's a executive management type of a program called Transformational Leadership, and we've strongly encouraged executive management to wield elegant reasonism transformationally, and that's what we mean when we say that. Elegant reasonism recognizes that barriers to entry. The term barriers to entry is stereotypically employed in businesses as a function of competition. Sometimes people talk about it in terms of lowering consumer costs as they try to justify installing barriers to entry so that protects the business that they have and their revenue streams. But elegant reasonism brings a whole new set of criteria to those factors. If you are entrenched in status quo thinking, that constitutes a barrier to entry to perspectives that are consistent and aligned with and reflect the unified universe. So you can have, you need to be careful how you wield this, how you deploy this, and how you bring it to bear on your niche in the global economy. And you need to be aware of where your barriers to entry are in terms of being able to execute your business plan. And that's where human action can help a lot. Human Action is a treatise on economics by Ludwig von Mises. It was written originally, I think, in 1949, which is interesting because Suzanne K. Langer's she published her first book in 1948. So none of this is new news. It just now has new applicability and new context, because we can then take that and apply it relative to the unified universe and connect it into everything else. Looking at frames of reference, status quo thinking, we'll talk about inertial frames and other things to try and bring consistency to the thought that they are employing for different investigative purposes. The frame of reference for the emergence model, which is the first model to close to unification, is something called the event frame. And there are 7 phases that predominantly characterize the activity, the action transpiring in that particular phase. And they're just numbered 1 through 7, and we typically call them EFPS, whatever the number is. But the first one is I guess we need to probably back up. The emergence model has as its precept something called the most basic particle, and everything else is derived from the intrinsic nature of that particle, the MBP. And the 2 primary processes that are derived as a function of that nature is the fundamental entanglement function, and that is the build process, and it is limited by the other process that we call severance. And so EFPS1 is the cascade towards severance, and it is because it is the intrinsic nature of MBPs is why time is constant, is why the arrow of time is always positive. Time in the emergence model is an action displacement index. That's why time travel is foo-foo dust. It doesn't exist. But I'm not going to get off into the weeds on that. So anyway, the geodesic interval is EFPS2. When 2 real objects begin to interact in the event frame, that's characterized by EFPS3. If they get locked together so that they don't pass one another in space, then something could interact with something and then continue on its geodesic interval. Photons traveling along a geodesic interval are an example of that. Resonant feedback, and then max Q, the maximum energy, and subsidence, and then the endurance. There's all kinds of geology things we could do here. There's things we could talk about in terms of astrophysics. There's things, but if you want to talk about it in terms of business, then we can think of it as a creation of a new market. And so EFPS1 there would be a cascade to a new market, as all the initial entrepreneurial thought that goes into creating that market. And then the isolated market development, which occurs usually in-house. It's the development activities of a small group of people creating a new device, maybe televisions, cell phones, etc. are examples. And then when they go to IPO and they do disruptive action, etc. If you're a student of business, you'll recognize these things. But the fundamental point that I'm trying to make is that these frames of reference all have the same kinds of activities associated with them, and it doesn't really matter whether you're talking about astrophysics or you're talking about business development. They're the same. And they have the same kinds of quality associated with their character. Point on the competitive threat, people need to understand that elegant reasonism is disruptive to status quo thinking, but what they need to recognize is that the genie is out of the bottle and the game is afoot. The USPTO has published this on November the 26th, 2020. The more people who engage and understand that, and that's going to be a worldwide statement, that essentially means that there's a set of urgency associated with embracing elegant reasonism, and there's going to be a high degree of intrepidity that's required on the part of enterprise worldwide. We can only encourage you to get there as fast as you possibly can. So let's go through a couple of examples. Impact number one, let's consider that the finance industry, you're tasked with assessing the risk associated with an IT company's portfolio and position it in the marketplace in order to determine their business strength. Maybe it might be an analytical report for a financial paper or a company or a website. And that's when you're going to go back to that decision checkpoint flowchart and understand where a given company is. Have they been able to gate through Langer epistemology errors, and are they conducting their systems reviews to understand how their derivation of value is being delivered to their consumers, and is it consistent with the unified universe? And it's a yes or no question. They're just going to need to make those assessments. The free marketplace is going to make those assessments for you, whether or not you do them. You can deny it if you want to, but the free market is the individuals out around the world that are investing in business are going to maybe help companies come to grips with this, whether they want to or not. But those are natural market forces, and that activity, that volatility will be organic. And to this point, that all of these presentations, again, back to that notice that we put at the beginning of the presentation here, these presentations are online and they are available worldwide to anybody that registers. It's in the user library, and all you got to do is go register, sign in, and download these PDF files. And anybody, anywhere can do that. Okay, let's talk about another example. This example points out that there might be implications to the legal industry in terms of what constitutes evidence. The fact that status quo thinking cannot get to a perception of anything, and by anything I mean evidence, relative to the unified universe, means that there are aspects of it that are not being perceived. They're not being communicated to a jury. They're not being reflected in precedent cases. And there's all kinds of different things that may come up as a result of this. And so in that sense, again, elegant reasonism is disruptive to the status quo of how these things are made manifest or have been made manifest in the past. And so we just need to look at a review of all of this. We need the legal industry to embrace elegant reasonism across all of the practices and courtrooms, and then use the analytical stack to make sure that the essential elements of a case remain true in the context of the unified universe. If they don't, then that brings up a whole nother set of issues, and those will be sorted out over time. And so it's just another example of maybe the disruptive nature of elegant reasonism, but it is what it is, and it's here, and like I said, the genie is out of the bottle, the game is afoot. So I can only encourage you to go and understand that. Suzanne K. Langer's book, Philosophy in a New Key, goes through a lot of the symbology and makes those points. It's a pretty good book, but it's very detailed. The area that most of this comes from is around page 74 in that book, and you can see that and read it in totality and then reassess how that relates to you and the things that we've already talked about in this presentation. Example 3. You're a Six Sigma black belt, and you've been charged with the deployment of elegant reasonism for a large organization whose core mission is development of high technology. Many, if most, of the scientists and engineers are entrenched in status quo thinking, maybe in full denial because of past personal successes. The question then is, how do you go about enlightening them to gain their support in order to conduct a comprehensive systems review so that you can then update the enterprise's business plan? So I've got some bullets here, and I would encourage you to review those and then maybe come up with some of your own. These are just a few examples that we have. I'm not going to read these on the chart here, but we have videos on the SOLREI YouTube channel that you can see and understand that entanglement is consistent in the emergence model and provides answers. And when I say answers, I mean simultaneous logically correct truths between different models that would otherwise be unfathomable. And so the point here is to get people out of the rut of status quo thinking and into a framework where they can engage across the dynamics of elegant reasonism and that generalized process flow, and then work that decision checkpoint flowchart. The fourth example is that you might be a research director for a renowned R&D consortium, and the board of directors have become aware of elegant reasonism and have asked you to justify new experiments which cost billions in construction costs, human capital, and the implications of those subsequent results. That's when you need to get back and review those 3 process charts, understand those tools. You're going to need to mode shift your experiments, and you're going to need to articulate what changes are needed to your equipment and the experimental premise. If you were looking for signal traversal that includes status quo thinking across mediums, then you may well need to rethink those things and to mode shift those things, because the implications of the core construct model to model are different. Those patterns change and shift radically. And so you just need to go through and understand the emergence model, what it means, how it's employed, and how it's employed in elegant reasonism, because it is the first model to close to unification. It is the litmus test that your experiments are going to have to get through in order to answer your board of directors questions. Example 5, as an executive manager, you must position your company relative to new technologies potentially influencing your decisions, including quantum computing. You have to speak at your annual shareholders meeting, and quantum computing is a prevalent topic. There is a point here, and we numbered them in order here, and it's, only the emergence model in context of elegant reasonism closes to unification. That is to say, it is the first fully compliant model with the realm of C's, one of which is closure. There's nothing in status quo thinking that can come close to that, and that includes quantum computing. But the question is, why is that so? And then we drop down to the next bullet, is that we can distill that whole conversation down to the space-time mass interface. And nothing can transit that interface without first conversion to energy. And it is for that reason that nothing real can employ a single geometric reference point in any reference frame. So if you've got the Earth-Moon system, for example, we can say that the gravity on the moon is what it is, and the gravity on the Earth is what it is, and that the gravity is locking, and we can go through all of the relativistic equations and see that logical truth, but we must consider what constitutes every real construct in that reference frame. One of the concepts there is space-time between those two, because that's what manifests the concept of gravity. And when we realize that nothing real can transit the space-time mass interface without conversion to energy, and this is the reason that quantum gravity experiments have all failed. We then drop down and realize that those are logical discussions. They are logically correct discussions. They work. But they not only do they not close to unification, they'll never close to unification, exactly for that reason. And so we then come to the realization that 100% of all quantum computers employ abstractions in the form of electrons and photons, which have mass. And it should be noted here too that photons are stereotypically reported as having no mass. They do, but it's just so infinitesimally small that it's of no regard in any the vast majority of every math calculation you'd ever want to do. And so it's reported as that photons don't have mass, but they do. It's just really, really small. Because superposition, for example, is based on the probabilistic nature of states, and you get into all kinds of elaborate discussions of those and how you measure those and what the metrics are. And when we look at the emergence model and we mode shift these discussions from M1 to M5, for example, we see that those superpositions being going through the statistics to calculate those things are functions of entanglement limited by severance over in M5. And we come to a different set of insights in terms of what those things mean. There's obviously needs to be a much fuller discourse on all of this, and I'm sure that many of the major companies that are pursuing quantum computing will be very eager to start doing those exercises. The fundamental point here, finally down this stack, is that the emergence model in context of elegant reasonism will reconcile those various issues. Mode shifting those discussions finds that entanglement distance as a function of architectural mass as the source of probabilistic nature of superposition. Remember that in M5, the fundamental entanglement function is limited by severance. EFPS1 cascades determine when severance occurs, and that is a function of the respective and relative architectures in the event frame. The 800-pound gorilla in the room on all of this is architectures of mass. And there's a great deal of R&D that needs to be done on that topic. And the SOLREI company asserts that that's probably the single largest computing opportunity humanity will ever have. Once we understand that, then there's all kinds of other things that we can go do. And so for these reasons, we still choose Elegant Reasonism on that way back in the business impact chart. We still choose Elegant Reasonism because it preserves and protects the current investments in knowledge and research. It allows us to mode shift that into alignment with the unified universe, and therefore it illuminates and illustrates the path forward better than status quo thinking because it closes to unification. And so for that reason, the SOLREI company views Elegant Reasonism as the critical path forward. Transformational leadership. It should be recognized that Elegant Reasonism, and this is a today statement, is that it's disruptive because of Langer epistemology errors, the fact that almost nobody understands any of this yet, which is the reason we're doing these presentations. And we encourage executive managers across enterprises worldwide to embrace Elegant Reasonism in context of transformational leadership. And there's a bunch of bullets here, and there's universities around the world that teach these kinds of programs, and we would encourage you to embrace those programs wherever they are taught. Yeah, and the new catchphrase is going to be critically situationally aware thinking. And what we mean by that is that you're going to be able to understand the source of a given conversation model to model. So if you're having a conversation with somebody, then critical thinking is going to, in this context, is going to allow you to understand that this person that you're talking to is entrenched in M1 or they're entrenched in M2, and that fundamentally defines their thinking, and that you are going to have to help them move, and if you're going to have to conduct paradigm shifts in that other person, or suggest to that other person that they achieve those paradigm shifts, and maybe your own experiences can be used to help them grow and understand, and you want to do that with the criteria of transformational leadership. And I think that's going to be very important to do, and you want to lead by doing. Normally, new patents reflect relatively narrow market niches. This is the first time in history that a single IP asset has affected, to some degree, Absolutely, every sector and every niche without exception. Again, the USPTO published our patent on November 26, 2020, and at that point, the market comprehension of unification has been inflected. It's going to start shifting, and it remains to be seen how those tectonics are going to play out. But civilization is going to take some time to come to grips with this, and the various factors are going to normalize across the markets globally, and volatility will likely be an unknown factor to some degree, but we can certainly anticipate that it's a non-trivial event. The unified universe is subtle, and it doesn't care what you think about it. It is unified whether you think it is or not. An interesting dynamic that we realized is something that we call neural network reconfiguration by programming, or NNRP. You may have heard some motivational speakers talk about NLP, neuro linguistic programming, or teaching transformational leadership in the context of psychology. All of these things play into what the SOLREI company calls NNRP. We can trace the emergence model and the MVP up through all configurations of architectural mass. That includes up to and distinguishing inorganic matter from organic matter, and then into biology and up all the way up to central nervous systems and our brains, in which case we get to the Brodmann areas and medical analysis and all that in terms of the neural networks and how that all plays out. But the interesting piece here to us was that as someone becomes more familiar with Elegant Reasonism, their thinking, their critical, situationally aware thinking, brings their CNS and brain patterns into alignment as well, because what these programs taught by universities around the world point out is that your neural network paths change based on your perceptions and your knowledge of the realm in which you are operating. And that's what NLP does, and that's what these motivational thinkers sell. And our point is that we now understand some of the linkages behind some of that, and now we recognize that over time, as people come to understand what Elegant Reasonism is and integrate that into their thinking, that it physically alters their neural network paths, and their thinking becomes aligned with the unified universe. And it is for that reason that you will see things as you look that you did not fathom before you comprehended unification. And that's important for researchers, that's important for business people, that's important for scientists, it's important for, doesn't matter what your discipline of science is, it's important. And it's interesting to us that these things all fall into a line relative to the unified universe, and we might also then back up and use that as yet again another example of how these things are make manifest and support the case for unification as a whole, as a holistic whole. And so none of this is really new, but we are looking at old things in a new way. And it's going to become very important how we choose to apply it. It's up to our progeny to pick up the mantle here and take it forward. What I can say is that in terms of futurism, is that the long-term insights suggest an enhanced value associated with the biosphere of Earth. Even if we move to Mars, Earth is still important. The path we all took to get to where civilization currently is a much more narrow path than anyone ever anticipated. And it can be extinguished in an instant if we ignore the messages and the clues that are right in front of us all. And so we encourage people to embrace Elegant Reasonism, look at the recent astronomical evidence that's occurring in our own solar system, and then revisit quite a few other areas. And environmentalism is going to take on a new set of values in that context. Those are probably short term being something in the next 20 to 30 years. More long term, as we move to other places, the work that Elon Musk is doing, Jeff Bezos and others, and the agencies at different governments like NASA and over in Russia and other places, and even China. We need to do that not in a political way, but in a way that supports humanity and civilization. So the executive summary is that Elegant Reasonism requires critical situational awareness thinking in order to maximize value derivation as a function of cognition of unification. Wow, that's a mouthful. Essentially what it means is that you need to understand the source of a given conversation and the model, the encapsulated interpretive model that is the basis for that conversation. And can you mode shift it? And can you mode shift it dynamically in a conversation with somebody else? That's what you have to be able to get to. You have to be able to say, okay, well, no, this is not, it doesn't look this way, it looks that way. And we have to mode shift that conversation but we cannot solve problems using the same thinking that we used when we created them. And that's a direct quote from Einstein. Suzanne Langer said that when we have new insights and a new way to think, that it brings a whole new world of questions that must then be asked. And Elegant Reasonism certainly does do that. And I would also say that just because unification has been accomplished, it does not mean that there's not more work to do. We have a great deal of work to do. Just because we can reflect the universe bang to bang does not necessarily mean that there's nothing else to do, because we now have to connect all the other facets of everything we do into that same model using the same reference frame phase steps, the event frame phase steps. The other piece that I would point out here is that the emergence model does close to unification, and for all intents purposes, it is a mode-shifted version of the standard model of particle physics. But that doesn't mean that somebody won't come up with a better model than that one. If you want to use the Elegant Reasonism framework to do model investigations, maybe you can come up with a better model. That's great. Go for it. Do it. The emergence model is just what we came up with. And because Elegant Reasonism as an epistemology and a framework, which is a generalized process, it requires at least one of the models used closes to unification. And for that reason, we included the emergence model as a function of what it is we filed. That's why that's there. But it doesn't mean that somebody somewhere won't come up with a better one. If they do, great. If not, use the emergence model in the interim. So there's, the real work is in front of us. This is a great benchmark in terms of where we were and how we got here. But we can't sit on our laurels, and we need to go forward. As we said, the game is afoot. Thank you for your time today, and we hope you enjoyed this presentation of the business influences in unification's wake. Take care. Have a great day.